What is up, guys? It's Orcaflop, and today I'm coming at you with another video. And today I'm going to be bringing you an IMSA news video, something I've been wanting to do for a little while now, but I just didn't really have much big news to go into. But now I do. So without further ado, here we go. And today's video subject is going to be on Scott Atherton, the current president of IMSA, is going to be retiring after this year. He's just no longer going to be running the sport and being kind of the face of IMSA and be the leader of it and develop the sport to where it is now and towards how it could be in the future. Now, obviously, this is really big news considering the fact that Scott Atherton's kind of been the sole reason IMSA's been on such a great recovery and been on an uprising since I would say about 2014 when it hit IMSA probably hit its all-time low at around 2014, and then Scott Atherton kind of brought it up ever since when he merged the Grand Am and the American Le Mans Series. And to have this happen is really, really strange because I thought Scott Atherton was going to be at least around till around 2025, but no, he's decided to make an early retirement and pursue other things but we still do not know who is going to take over for Scott Atherton as the president of IMSA. And the reason this is such big news is because just all the things Scott Atherton has done for IMSA, and he's brought it to where IMSA is now. I mean, I would say this year has been such a growth spurt for IMSA. It's not a growth spurt, an uprising for IMSA. The TV ratings have increased, attendance has increased, and more people have taken a more serious look at IMSA within, I would even say, the last 2 years. But this year specifically has been outstanding. I mean, we started off the year with like a 20% increase in people showing up to the Roar before the 24. And I think that's solely because of Scott Atherton and his brilliant ways of marketing the sport and making it to what it is now. And a lot of people have told me that, oh man, you always are so positive about IMSA. Are you ever negative about this sport? What has been so wrong with this sport? IMSA was an absolute mess back in the day. And here we go. You want me to be negative about IMSA? Here you go. And I'm going to tell you the reason why Scott Atherton has been such an important figure in IMSA. And around 1999, there was a split in the late 90s between IMSA. Originally, it was like the GTO series and the LMP series that was currently owned by Sebring International Raceway, or Jim France. And then going into the 2000s, there was a break in distribution of money between manufacturers and tracks, and they weren't getting paid enough, so they decided to split up due to economical funds. And then NASCAR took ownership of the brand new Rolex Grand Am Series that began in 2003 and led the Daytona 24 Hours for the first time with a brand new car formula called what we know as now the DP. And originally it wasn't the DPI, it was the Daytona prototype. And Grand Am built this car. It was kind of like boxy looking. It was not really styled. The entire roof was boxy. There wasn't much manufacturer notice and different body panels and stuff like that. And honestly, it was an absolute mess. When I think it was 2001 when it wasn't released to full DPs yet, but they were like concept prototypes in the Rolex 24. And they were so terrible that the Corvette GT cars ended up beating them that year in the Rolex 24. A GT car was faster than a prototype at the time. And then 2002 and 2003, they made the official release of the DPs, and the DPs continuously ran through the stint of Grand Am, and then you have like a GT4 class with the Mazda RX-8s and the Porsche 911 GT3s, and it was kind of a broken series at the time. No one really knew, and if you wanted to go to the Rolex 24, you had to fund a DP team. No one really wanted to buy into the GT cars that Grand Am had at the time, and not to mention NASCAR really didn't care about owning Grand Am, considering they had their own program. I mean, 2003 NASCAR was exploding at the time, so they didn't really care about managing their other sports car half, so that's kind of where that went. And then the other side was owned by Sebring International Raceway, and they developed the American Le Mans Series, which was basically consisted of cars that America would take to Le Mans, for example, like Corvette GT car, Porsche 911 GT2, BMW M3, and then you'd have cars like the BMW V12 LMR, the Panos LMP car, and if you go into the later 2010s, you get the Porsche RS Spider that was owned by Roger Penske, and then you get the Audi LMP1s. And at the time, I would say the ALMS was in a much better financial state than Grand Am, but that was mainly because the track owners didn't really care about Grand Am at the time, because the real only thing Grand Am had over ALMS was the Rolex 24. And then the American Le Mans Series had the 12 hours of Sebring and the 6 hours of the Glen. We continue onward. The American Le Mans Series is doing great, not in terms of TV ratings, but in terms of manufacturers, because a lot of the manufacturers that were investing into ALMS would take those cars over to Le Mans. For example, in '99 when the BMW V12 LMR won, that was a part of the American Le Mans Series for a long time. In fact, it won the Laguna Seca race in '99 as well as the Le Mans in '99 as well. The BMW V12 LMR really led the pathway to where the ALMS was going at the time. And ALMS definitely had a growth spurt, as now Ferrari was into it with their 438, I believe it was. 430 maybe. I think it was the 430, I don't remember. Audi was into it. They brought in the Audi RA GT3 more specifically. And they were like separate classes. You'd have the LMP1 class, the LMP2 class. It literally looked like a downgrade of Le Mans. And then you had GT, at the time it was GT1. And then GT2, and then very rarely GT3. There was no GTLM, no GTD, they categorized it, and GT1 was quite like, GT1 and ALMS was like a concept of to where you can get your modern day sports cars to outperform these high-tech advanced prototypes. And it was a big thing in the 24 Hours of Le Mans with the Porsche 911 GT1, the Mercedes CLKR. They really tried to do what they could to enhance their performance against their already high-tech race cars and then see if they could put it on the street. And initially it worked, but with a lot of the GT1 cars, they had problems to where if they would go on an uphill, a lot of the air would go underneath the car and they tend to blow over. For example, the Porsche 911, I think it was at Road Atlanta, I want to say it was. I don't remember, but it was the Mobil 1 Porsche 911 GT1 did blow over at Road Atlanta. And then Le Mans, the Mercedes CLKR, I believe it was. It did a blowover very similarly. The air got underneath, and that was because of the sheer aero of how they looked so similarly. So the GT1 program ultimately got a downgrade in about 2003 with just the Corvettes, the Aston Martin DB9, and they just left it at that as high-performance GT cars rather than something trying to be that it's not. GT cars are meant to be, your production cars, not prototypes. And it was a little experiment they tried to do in the late 90s, but it didn't work. So they went back to, and GT1 was just pretty much Corvettes, Porsches, Aston Martin, and very occasionally the Ferrari. But it was an interesting class in the mid-2000s. And once again, Grand Am was really struggling. The only thing that was really keeping Grand Am alive was the Rolex 24, and you'd have those NASCAR entries like Tony Stewart, Dale Jr., Michael Waltrip, Jimmy Johnson, who drove for the Pontiac Lowe's team for a stint, and I think in 2008 it was. Scott Pruitt was in Grand Am. Lucas Lohr was in LMS. He drove for the Mazda prototype LMP1 team. And then, things kind of stagnated there. And ALMS was doing its own thing. Grand Am was doing its own thing until the economy crashed in 2008 and things drastically changed. And throughout this portion, Aston Martin got an LMP1 car into the ALMS. No, Ferrari did not. Well, Ferrari had a prototype in ALMS in the late 90s and early 2000s, but they kind of scratched that program at around 2005. Um, shoot. And then you had the big teams, Audi and Porsche. And I think Peugeot did a stint in ALMS as well at that time because they were pretty big in Le Mans. In fact, I think it was Peugeot that won in 2009. I know they won in 92 and 93, but that was with a different car. But when the economy crashed, a lot of the funds for the American Le Mans Series dropped, and then Porsche and Audi were just like, let's get out of here. We can't afford to race in a series that won't ultimately be able to keep itself up. So Aston Martin jumped out, Audi jumped out, Porsche jumped out, and Roger Penske jumped out along with Porsche to pursue mainly his NASCAR program. And then Grand Am, nothing really happened to Grand Am other than Grand Am was just kind of holding on for dear life. And then Scott Atherton came in. And he saw that the American Le Mans Series was on its deathbed. It was just the GT2 cars and GT3 cars. All the LMP cars had pretty much left other than probably Mazda and maybe Nissan. But as soon as Audi and Porsche left, everything went downhill because Audi and Porsche by far had the most factory backing and the most important influence on the ALMS. So ALMS was on its deathbed, and Grand Am was kind of doing its own thing. And then Scott Atherton tried to make a deal with NASCAR and Sebring International Raceway to allow both series to merge together. And this is by far a better merger than, like David Land said, than the kart and the IRL, because you actually had a good solid compromise between NASCAR and the owners of Sebring. And they combined together in about 2014 to become the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship. And Scott Atherton allowed them to have a great agreement. However, 2014 was probably IMSA's lowest point. The GT class was shit. The DP cars were garbage. You had the Corvette prototype that didn't look any flashy whatsoever. You had the Ganassi Fords that looked ugly. It was not really fan appealing at the time, and IMSA was kind of one of those sports at the time where you'd be like, oh, that exists. So you fast forward from there, 2015, Scott Atherton makes a lot of changes. He gives the GT class more emphasis. The BMW Z4, which was initially in when they did the merge, I think then became the BMW M6 in 2015. So it was a lot more of an appealing car to fans, and because the BMW M6 was such on a rise at the time, a lot of fans looked at that and were like, hey, I like the BMW M6. It's in this racing series. And rather than focusing the prototype teams on going to Le Mans, it was more of a GT focus. You had teams like Risi kept at his own, the Ferrari team that's been around since the American Le Mans Series days. They were going to Le Mans. The Corvette Racing Factory team going to Le Mans. Porsche, BMW. The GT3 teams rarely went to Le Mans. They kind of were just their own thing since they were privateer teams. Initially you had teams like Land Motorsport that owned the Audi program, and Land Motorsport's kind of out of IMSA now since Audi as a whole kind of left IMSA, at least where we are at now. But Land Motorsport was initially one of the GT teams that hopped on in GT3 and led their program from there on out. And since 2015, I would say Scott Atherton made these great marketing skills on the Rolex 24 more specifically, because the Rolex 24 was kind of the race that led into all the motorsport seasons coming in. The Rolex 24 is in late January. Then after that, you got the Daytona 500, then St. Petersburg, and then the Australian Grand Prix. The Rolex 24, and I would even say the Chili Bowl, are two of the races that lead into the motorsports series. So Scott Atherton jumped on that and said, hey, let's get some marketing into this and let's get more people watching the Rolex 24. And 2015 was a solid year. I think it was Ford, Chip Ganassi Racing, that won that year overall. And it was a pretty decent race from when I watched back, and, appealed to a lot of fans. 2016 Rolex 24. 2015 as a season as a whole, he did great marketing campaigns, great stuff that would help advance the sport. And then 2016 was really when IMSA got on the rise. The DPI program changed. You had Honda join into the sport with the Tequila Patron prototype team. Initially, before it was a Nissan Tequila Patron team, it was the Honda Tequila Patron team. And Scott Atherton worked his magic with marketing and said, "Hey, this is the race that's going to lead into your motorsports season." And the 2016 Rolex 24 was absolutely fantastic. The Honda Tequila Patron team, that was a brand new team at the time, ended up winning overall in the Rolex 24 race. And then, when they merged Grand Am and ALMS, you got great aspects of both series. You had the DPI cars that transitioned from Grand Am. You had the GT cars and GTLM, for more example. They stopped using GT2 and GT3 because that was practically owned by Sebring. And whoever owned Circuit de la Sarre at the time, that was the head of like the ELMS and the WEC. But continuing on, the GTLM class was like a main transition from ALMS. Same with GT Daytona. At the time, they had Prototype Challenge. That was also kind of a transition from ALMS, but the Prototype Challenge class was basically LMP2 and ALMS, but just downgraded a little bit to even not perform as good as GT2 cars. And Prototype Challenge eventually died in 2017, or after 2017, because there just weren't any teams that were willing to get interested into it, since DP was the primary class that everyone wanted to be in. So, continuing on, the 2016 Rolex 24 had an awesome finish. That's still one of my favorites to my heart. With between the two Corvettes, the number 4 and the number 3, it was ultimately, I think it was the number 3. Yeah, it was the it was the number 4 Corvette that won. I believe it was, right? Oh my God, how do I not remember that? Okay, well, I got to look back, but one of the Corvettes won. They had a great photo finish. It was between Garcia. Yeah, it was Antonio Garcia and Oliver Gavin, if I remember correctly, that they were battling it out. And I want to say it was the number 4 Corvette that beat the number 3. I think it was. I think Gavin brought the 4 Corvette home and won. And it was such a great finish, and the fans were on the edge of their seat, and they were like, "Man, this is good racing." So from there on out, they were thinking they'd watch more. And the 2016 12 Hours of Sebring was absolutely chaotic. The Porsche and the Corvettes were going after it. I can't remember who won Sebring that year, but nonetheless, I do remember that it was a very chaotic race, and it appealed to many fans. And Scott Atherton was doing a fantastic job at being able to balance fan experience, manufacturer loyalty, and hospitality. Manufacturer loyalty, he emphasized manufacturers on bringing their own engines and own chassis, whether they be in DPI or the GT classes. He let them bring them to the track, and then with the fan experience, you had the awesome cars, the Corvette's loud, rumbly LS V8, the Porsche 911's beautiful, screaming, flat 6 engine. You had the fan appeal of the cars themselves. You had a great balance between the manufacturers being able to bring out their factory sports cars and the fans being able to enjoy those factory sports cars. IMSA skyrocketed in popularity. And 2017 was the last year of the Prototype Challenge until Scott Atherton axed that, noticing that it was just privateer teams that were already looking at GT Daytona racing, and no factory teams were really going into Prototype Challenge anyway. They were just leaning more towards DPI and GTLM and GT Daytona. So he axed the Prototype Challenge class, and then 2018, the Prototype class in general had a great championship battle that year between the Action Express number 31 and the Core Autosport number 54 LMP2 team. That was a Gibson engine, and they had a fantastic battle for the championship, and it proved that you were able to merge LMP2 and the prototypes to have a great championship battle, and it was a very entertaining season to watch of IMSA. Granted, the 2018 Rolex 24 was probably one of the worst IMSA races I've ever watched. It was still, the season as a whole was really good. And for me personally, 2016, 2017, 2018, all Corvette racing championships in the GTLM class. How could I hate that? But continuing on, 2018 was ultimately a really fun season that got a lot of fans pumped up, and I think going into 2019 with the Roar Before the 24 showed all the progress that IMSA's made with a 20% increase in attendance at the Roar. And that's not even a race, really. That's just a test session, pretty much. And that's a 28% increase in attendance. So that's absolutely fantastic. And IMSA, ever since, has gained lots of popularity among car people. They've gone to the IMSA races, talked to the teams. IMSA's been very popular ever since its shithole back in 2014, I would say. Scott Atherton, he's done a great job. He was the man behind the marketing campaigns. He was the man behind being able to create BOP, and BOP basically was allowing teams and manufacturers to have advantages, but not as much to where they would dominate races completely. And because of that, you got great racing products like the 2019 Long Beach race with the Porsches, the Corvettes, and the Ford GTs. Or a BOP wasn't a thing in 2007 Sebring, but nonetheless, that was a great finish in ALMS with Jörg Bergmeister and Tony Vilander in the Ferrari and Porsche GT2 cars. So, but nonetheless, like, Scott Atherton was the man behind BOP, and I think even BOP is sort of a thing in DPI now, and that's allowed great races to happen, like Road America this year. I'm trying to think of great races this year, and it's because of Scott Atherton putting an emphasis on balance and performance, so manufacturers can have an advantage, but not too much to where it creates a great racing product. He's done a wonderful job. Oh, I forgot. Mid-Ohio was a great race between the 86 Acura NSX and the number 12 Lexus. Long Beach still the best race of the year. 6 hours of the Glen for an endurance race I heard was really good. I didn't get to watch that race, but I did hear it was very good. Canadian Tire was a pretty good race. Get some entertaining racing going on there. I can't think off the top of my head, but I got to get back to where I was. But Scott Atherton, ever since he merged ALMS and Grand Am in 2014, he's done a wonderful job at being able to appeal to everybody. And I haven't seen a sport do that ever, specifically a motorsport. The FIA in Formula One has not been able to do it. NASCAR hasn't been able to do it. IndyCar sort of did it at one point, but not really. But Scott Atherton, he appealed to the manufacturers, the fans, the track owners. It was perfect. The track was getting its money from the fans coming to the races, and with that increase in fans coming to the races, the track revenue was great. The teams were getting paid well money for their success and devotion to the sport as a whole, and the fans got beautiful race cars to watch flying down straightaways and racing hard together. With the fans, you had the Corvettes versus the Ford GTs and Porsches. You had the Cadillacs and the Acuras, the Audis and the BMWs. Like, great. It's fantastic where IMSA is right now, and I would like to thank you, Scott Atherton, for doing all of that. It's incredible what Scott Atherton has been able to do to IMSA and how he is able to appeal to pretty much everybody, and that is an outstanding job in leadership by Scott Atherton and Jim France as well. Jim France is the CEO. Him and Jim France, they've done a great job to be able to interact with teams, fans, and track owners and manufacturers. They've done an absolutely fantastic job, and I cannot wait for the future of IMSA. And I hope that Scott Atherton's replacement is even better than he was, and he can be able to take this future 2021 LMP, similar to like hypercars and LMP1s. IMSA wants to go hybrid in DPI class, yes, I know, in 2021. But nonetheless, I hope that within the future, with the whole LMP2 DPI split, the GTLM class and losing manufacturers, and GTD not having enough privateer teams, I hope whoever takes over for Scott Atherton will lead IMSA into an even greater future than we have right now. And I can't wait for it. So thank you guys for watching this video. I just wanted to let off my feelings and basically inform you guys on how big of an impact Scott Atherton really has on IMSA as a whole. And I can't wait for the future. And have a wonderful retirement, Scott Atherton. I will, if I can get to it, I'll try to make a Petit Le Mans championship prediction video tomorrow or maybe even later today. So we'll see. But I'll try to get that video out and maybe some diecast reviews in the future. I'll have a Singapore Grand Prix review for Formula 1 tomorrow. But yeah, other than that, thank you, Scott Atherton, for all you've done for the sport. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.